Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He gave me one call. That's all it took to stir up everything I thought I'd already put away neatly on the shelves of my past. It was a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of evening when the house feels bigger than usual, and every sound echoes a little longer than it should. The kettle had just started its low hum, and I was halfway through folding laundry when my phone rang. I remember staring at the screen for a full minute before I even breathed. His name. After all those years, you know how sometimes your heart knows before your mind does? That's exactly how it felt. A sharp, small jolt in my chest, not painful, but familiar, like something waking up that had been asleep for too long. I answered, my voice calm, almost too calm, pretending the years hadn't changed anything. Hello? I said. For a few seconds, there was silence, that kind of silence that holds 1,000 words back. Then I heard it. His voice. A little deeper now, slower maybe, but still with that tone that always sounded like home. I wasn't sure if this number still worked, he said softly. It does, I replied. I wasn't sure if you still would. He laughed quietly, that same gentle laugh that used to disarm me when I was angry, when we were young and certain that time was endless. And then, for a while, we just talked. Not about anything special at first. The weather. Work. How our parents were doing. It felt awkward in the beginning, like trying on a coat you once loved that doesn't quite fit anymore. But then, something shifted. He told me he'd been driving through our old town that morning. Said he'd passed the cafe where we used to meet before work. The one with the squeaky door and the crooked sign. It's still there, he said. Even the same blue chairs outside. I could picture it instantly. I could even smell the coffee, feel the cold metal of those chairs under my hands. For a second, it felt like I was there again, younger, hopeful, and not afraid of what time could take away. We talked for over an hour that night. The kind of conversation that's not about catching up but about remembering who you were when you didn't need to explain yourself. He told me he'd never forgotten the way I used to laugh when the rain caught us walking home, and I told him I still had the book he once gave me, the one with his handwriting inside the cover, *4 rainy days, when you need warmth. He went quiet for a moment, then said, I didn't think you'd keep it. I keep too much, I admitted. Some things just don't fade. The kettle had long stopped whistling by then. The house was silent except for his voice, steady but low, like he was afraid too much sound might break the spell. I sat on the edge of my chair, staring at the floor, realizing that this conversation, this single unexpected call, was reopening something I'd promised myself I'd never touch again. When we finally said goodbye, he hesitated before hanging up. Maybe, he said, we could have coffee sometime. No expectations. Just coffee. And that's how it began again, quietly, almost cautiously, like two people stepping back into a room that used to hold their laughter. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat by the window, watching the lights across the street flicker through the trees, listening to the hum of the night. I tried to convince myself it was just a friendly call, that people reach out all the time, that memories are harmless if you don't feed them. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was something in his voice, something careful but deliberate. He didn't sound lonely. He sounded unfinished. Like there was something he needed to say but didn't dare to. I caught my reflection in the glass, older, calmer, maybe a little stronger, but there was still that same glimmer in my eyes. The one that always appeared when life was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. It's strange, isn't it, how one call can shift everything? How a voice from your past can remind you of who you used to be, not the person you became through years of responsibility and quiet routines, but the one who once believed in the magic of small moments. The next morning, I found myself walking to that same cafe. I told myself it was coincidence, that I just wanted a good cup of coffee. But when I stood in front of those familiar blue chairs, I knew better. They were still chipped around the edges, still cold from the early morning breeze. Inside, the same bell above the door jingled, the same smell of roasted beans, the same sunlight spilling across the counter. Time had passed, but the place hadn't changed, and as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder if he really meant it when he said just coffee. Or if, like me, he was searching for a piece of the past that felt too unfinished to leave behind. I stirred my coffee slowly, thinking about the years that had stretched between us. About how people move on, yet certain memories never stop breathing quietly in the background of their lives. I thought of the laughter, the arguments, the long drives with no destination, the way we could read each other without words, and then, for the first time in years, I smiled to myself. Because even if nothing more ever came from that call, even if it was just a moment suspended between two old hearts that still remembered, it reminded me that some connections never really end, they just wait for the right time to be heard again. The bell over the cafe door rang, and my heart, foolish, hopeful, and still a little young, skipped once, but that part of the story, well, that's for another day. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't overthink it. It was just one phone call, after all. People from the past reach out sometimes, nostalgia is a strange thing. But the truth was, I woke up earlier than usual, made coffee I barely touched, and found myself staring at my phone like it might ring again. It didn't. Not that day still, something inside me had changed. It's hard to explain, not excitement exactly, but a quiet stirring, like when you sense rain before the clouds even appear. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, wondering about the things we didn't say. He'd sounded different, steadier, maybe wiser, but there was a hint of sadness underneath every word. By noon, I couldn't resist anymore. I sent a simple message, "Good to hear from you yesterday. Hope you made it home safe." It was just polite, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself. He replied within minutes. I did. "I'm glad we talked." Then, after a pause, I meant what I said about coffee. I read that line 3 times before I answered. Maybe, I typed, and pressed send before I could change my mind. That afternoon, I went through old boxes I hadn't touched in years. I don't even know why. Maybe I was searching for something, some piece of proof that what we had once been wasn't just a memory shaped by time. In one of those boxes, I found a photograph. We were standing by the lake, the wind pushing my hair across my face, and he was looking at me, not the camera. That look, it was gentle, unguarded, the kind of look that only happens when someone really knows you. I set the photo aside and closed the box. I thought about calling him, but I didn't. Instead, I decided that if this coffee ever happened, I wanted to walk into it as who I am now, not who I used to be. 2 days later, he called again. "Are you busy tomorrow?" he asked. There was that same warmth in his voice, but this time it was steadier, more certain. "Not really," I said, glancing out the window at the fading afternoon light. "Then let me buy you that coffee." I could have said no. I could have made an excuse, work, errands, anything. But I didn't. "All right," I said quietly. "Tomorrow." When I hung up, my hands trembled just a little. It wasn't fear, exactly. More like anticipation wrapped in something fragile, the kind of feeling you get when you open an old letter and the words still mean something. The next day, I stood in front of my closet for what felt like forever. It wasn't about trying to impress him. It was about feeling comfortable in my own skin again. I settled on a simple blue blouse, the same shade as those cafe chairs, and jeans. I even put on a touch of perfume, the one I hadn't worn in years. The cafe was exactly as I remembered. The bell chimed as I walked in, and the smell of coffee hit me like a wave of familiarity. I found a table near the window. My hands wrapped around the cup, more for comfort than warmth. Then I saw him. He looked older, of course, we both did. A few lines around the eyes, hair touched with grey, shoulders a little heavier with time. But when he smiled, it was the same smile that used to make me forget every reason I had to stay angry. "Hey," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hey." For a few moments, we just looked at each other. There was no awkwardness, no rush to fill the silence. It felt peaceful. Like meeting an old version of yourself and realizing you finally understand her. He told me about his life, his work, his travels, the long quiet years that followed his divorce. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a kind of calm acceptance. When he spoke, he didn't avoid the past. He mentioned my name in stories like it still belonged there. At one point, he asked, "Do you ever think about those days?" I smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But I try not to live there." "That's good," he said, nodding. "Because I've been living there too long." His honesty caught me off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the small trees along the sidewalk. The sound of clinking cups filled the pauses between us. I called because he stopped, looking down at his hands. Because I missed talking to someone who really saw me. You always did. I didn't know what to say. There are moments when words only make things smaller, and this was one of them. Instead, I said, I'm glad you called. He smiled then, not the polite kind, but a real one, full of relief. We talked for hours. About the things we learned, the people we became, and the ways time had softened us. There was laughter, too, that quiet, shared kind that only happens when two people know the same memories by heart. When it was time to leave, he walked me to my car. The air was cool, the sun already fading behind the rooftops. We stood there for a moment, not knowing what the next step should be. Can we do this again? He asked finally. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I did. Maybe, I said again, and this time we both smiled. As I drove home, I realized how strange it felt to feel seen again, but differently this time. Gently. Respectfully. Like time hadn't erased what mattered, only refined it. That night, I put the photograph back in the box. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't need to look at it anymore. I'd seen the real thing, and for the first time in years, I slept without replaying the past, just quietly wondering what tomorrow might bring. The following week, the coffee meet became a rhythm we both looked forward to. It wasn't every day, and it wasn't every week. There was something unspoken in our pace, a gentle understanding that neither of us wanted to rush. Life had taught us patience, and now it seemed almost natural to tread carefully through something that had been years in the making. That Thursday, I arrived early. The sky was a pale grey, and a soft drizzle fell outside, leaving the pavement shiny with reflections of streetlights. The cafe's familiar bell rang as I pushed the door open, and the smell of roasted coffee beans instantly wrapped around me like an old, comforting blanket. I ordered a latte, my hands cradling the warm cup as I looked out at the rain-slick street. He arrived a few minutes later. I could hear the faint tapping of his shoes against the floor before I even turned. When I did, he gave me that same warm, gentle smile that had lingered in my memory all week. Hey, he said, voice calm, steady, familiar. Hey, I replied, and we shared a quiet moment, just being there, acknowledging the presence of someone who had been part of your life and had returned with care, not expectation. We sat by the window, watching the rain trickle down the glass in tiny, dancing rivulets. I couldn't help but notice the way he glanced at the world around us, his eyes tracing familiar patterns, yet noticing details I hadn't seen before. He had always been observant, someone who noticed the small things, the things most people let slip by unnoticed. I came across an old bookshop yesterday, he said, stirring his coffee slowly. I remembered how we used to wander into those little stores, searching for anything that caught our fancy. I smiled, remembering the afternoons we'd spend tucked between shelves, sharing pages with dog-eared or circled with little notes. I do remember. You always picked the strangest ones. And you always pretended not to laugh, he said, eyes crinkling. But you did. You always did. There was a pause then, and I realized I was holding my breath without knowing it. The rain fell heavier for a moment, tapping against the glass, and it felt like the world had quieted itself around us. In that silence, we weren't two people trying to reconnect, we were two people who had never truly let go, finding a space where it felt safe to be themselves again. He shared stories of the years in between, work that had taken him across cities, moments of loneliness he hadn't expected, victories that were bittersweet. And I shared mine, the quiet routines, the small joys, the losses that had shaped me in ways he hadn't known. We didn't offer advice, and we didn't judge. We listened. And in listening, I realized how much I had missed being understood so completely. At one point, he reached across the table, just lightly brushing his hand near mine. Not touching, not expecting, but close enough that it made me aware of the warmth of another human being. I didn't pull away. I didn't move closer either. I just noticed, silently acknowledging that some gestures say more than words ever could. Outside, the drizzle eased into a gentle mist, and I noticed the familiar blue of the chairs reflecting the fading light. He looked out the window and then back at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't dared to hope for: sincerity, curiosity, and an honesty that only grows with age. Do you ever wonder, he asked quietly, if we'd be different people if we'd stayed in touch all these years? I thought about it, stirring my coffee slowly. Maybe, I said. But maybe we needed the time to be who we are now, to come back and recognize each other in a better way. He nodded. I like that. I like that a lot. We lingered there, talking until the cafe began to empty, until the soft hum of the espresso machine and the clatter of cups were the only sounds left. And when we finally stepped out into the cool evening, there was no rush, no pressure. We walked side by side down the quiet street, umbrellas tipping against the light rain, sharing small laughs, gentle stories, and comfortable silences. That night, I reflected on how strange life is, how people drift away, and yet, somehow, they can return when the timing is right. And I realized that what mattered wasn't the years lost. It was the recognition of each other now, the acceptance of the people we had become, and the willingness to see what might grow from this quiet, deliberate reconnect. On driving home, I noticed the way the streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, thinking how similar this moment felt to the delicate layers of our conversation, soft, reflective, and entirely real. And I smiled quietly to myself, because for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of anticipation that was rooted not in excitement or nostalgia, but in the calm certainty that some connections endure, quietly waiting for the right season to bloom again. By the time I arrived home, my heart felt lighter, my mind clearer, and for the first time in years, I slept knowing that some of the best parts of life are the ones that unfold slowly, tenderly, and with a patience that only time can teach. Over the next few weeks, our routine settled into something unexpectedly comforting. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic turns, just the slow, steady unfolding of shared time. Each coffee, each walk, each quiet conversation felt deliberate, like two people reacquainting themselves with a world they had once known intimately, and were now rediscovering with fresh eyes. One late afternoon, I found myself waiting for him outside the cafe, the air crisp with the first hints of autumn. Leaves swirled across the sidewalk in gentle spirals, and the sky carried the soft gold of a setting sun. He arrived with a familiar smile, his coat buttoned just enough against the chill. We greeted each other without words, a nod and a soft hey enough to convey the ease that had been building between us. We took our usual seats by the window, and for a moment, just sat in silence, watching the world pass. The cafe was quieter than usual, the low hum of conversation replaced by the occasional clink of cups and the rich scent of coffee filling the space. There was something unspoken in the pause, a mutual acknowledgement.